Hey, everybody. This is Josh Reeves with Dr. Barry Ebert. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Great. We're here at Mile High Church, enjoying a day here at the office, and I'm preparing some work for a class I get to start next week here, August 6th, on the wisdom of Martin Luther King Jr., and thought it'd be great if we talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, we'll kick it around a little bit. I think it's great that you're bringing his wisdom and his philosophy into the house here, because he had a lot of good talks, and it's good to kind of dive into those and see what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about Martin Luther King Jr., they think about his speeches, they think about civil rights, all of course, defined his career, but to me he was one of the great minds and philosophers of the last century as well. And even as a minister, I've learned as much studying and listening to his sermons than anybody else out there. And I think he has a key role in our science of mind teaching. Although he didn't identify as a religious scientist, he wasn't the standard, more traditional fundamentalist Christian that we may see today, which we respect. But he wasn't someone that was out there trying to per se bring people to the Lord, but more to practice what the Lord taught in being kind and caring to one another, and apply that in great results. I love spiritual teachers, but I'm going to always have a little bit more stake in those who bring it into the world and make something happen versus sit out there and just write a book or two.
Well, I think he was committed very much to social justice, and I think that's very much a Christian stance going back to Jesus, of bringing the society to a higher level and bringing more people in, making things more available to more people, and going beyond the tribes that we find ourselves in all the time. And I think that was a big part of his teaching as well, and trying to adhere to the principles of nonviolence and to enact social change in an appropriate way. And I think, I think it's a great message for our time.
Yeah, and something that relates to our New Thought teaching is, someone that King was really centered in was Henry David Thoreau. And Thoreau was the mentee of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who in the middle of the 1800s was starting something he called the Transcendentalist Club, these early American thinkers that included some great minds and eventually influenced everyone from Emily Dickinson to Walt Whitman to politicians as well. And Henry David Thoreau, it started off one day he didn't want to pay his taxes, and so he thought it was unjust, and so he wound up having to go to jail for it. But as he was growing in his career, he was seeing this great injustice of slavery, and was pointing out to people an idea that King really took to heart of, when a law is unjust, it's against your own conscience not to stand up against it and speak out against it, and to do so nonviolently but with clarity. And so King really studied that. And one of the things that was going on back during Thoreau's time was the fugitive slave law. So you had these new states, these new territories coming about in America, and the more northern states, they didn't want slavery to be legal there, and yet there was this desire of the government to try and keep everybody happy and together. And so one state may say that you can have slavery, and another state may say that you can't. And one of the things they did to compromise is some of these new territories, they had what they called the fugitive slave law, which is if a slave ran away from a state where slavery was legal into one where it wasn't, legally you had to bring them back. And so this was abhorrent to people like Thoreau and Emerson, and they started bringing in Frederick Douglass, all these amazing figures to start talking, and really kind of had maybe the first great civil rights movement in the United States that eventually led, of course, through great conflict and blood, to the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, and I'm doing quite a bit of reading about that now, about Lincoln coming in, becoming president, and he got elected in November of 1860, and then he was inaugurated in March of 1861. And by the time he was inaugurated, 7 states had seceded. They had already formed the Confederacy and had their president, Jefferson Davis. And, we think in our time that this is the most divisive that things have ever been, and that's not true. And these are issues that we've dealt with for a long time, and it's really us up to us to keep evolving. And I think that's what King was urging us to do. That's what great spiritual teachers urge us to do, to individually evolve, but also evolve as a culture and as a society, and to make our society more just and to stand up and to make that happen.
Yeah, and what I love about King, and what we'll talk about in the class, is he did that not by trying to divide people further, but by bringing people together. And so he took this idea of Thoreau's civil disobedience, and then later on, Gandhi, who was so inspired by Thoreau as well, he started following his satyagraha teaching, this idea of practicing nonviolence and loving your enemy or your opponent, we might say. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I love about Dr. King is he wasn't there trying to demonize even people that were racist, even people that were pro-segregation. I love a story that he tells in one of his sermons of being in jail, and he's saying, I always like to convert in jail, and he calls over a white police officer, he calls over some other prisoners, and they're talking about the white-black issues, and the guard is talking about how segregation is important to keep on going, and King asks him some question about his life and his salary and things like that, and comes to the conclusion, brother, you should be marching with us, you should be on our side, and using humor as opposed to be honest. Sometimes some of the issues I see with some of our social justice folks today, the strategy seems to create such controversy that you're actually dissing, putting down the people that, you may disagree with, and maybe they are wrong, but it's not in that spirit of, hey, let's come together. And King was such a master of that. And that was part of his nonviolent strategy, not only trying to protect his protesters, but saying through this power of love, not an emotional or soft kind of love, but a tough love, we can actually appeal, not to calling people out on their worst, but say there's something better in you. You know better, appealing to the highest part of their character and affecting change. It took a long time, but getting there. And, King was the culmination of so many incredible African-American activists that had been fighting to get to this point for a long time.
Yeah, well, we're both baseball guys, and Jackie Robinson got to work with Martin Luther King too, and Martin Luther King said that his the work that Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella did of breaking into baseball really was a big influence on him in terms of how we could move forward if you had great people who could hang in and do that kind of work. And I think that that in his time we see these same issues coming up over and over since the foundation of this country, and it's something that we've been given the mechanism to heal these things. We've been given the mechanism of a democracy, of a way of government that we can all participate in, and I think these leaders call us to step into that in a nonviolent way.
Yeah, and through owning it as well. I think when we look at something as terrible as slavery in America, we often think of it as the great black eye in our country. But I think what we forget sometimes is those Africans who came here came to fulfill and embody the American dream, perhaps more than any of us. You have folks that were brought here against their will, and yet who realized a great amount of freedom, a great amount of independence, a great amount of heart through incredible struggle, and still going through so much of that struggle today. But you take a Jackie Robinson, you take a Martin Luther King Jr., you take so many of the heroes of this country who, in spite of the odds stacked up against them, despite of being beaten down, helped transform the country, not only through realizing their dreams, but uplifting everybody a lot better. It's such an inspiring thing about something how so tragic part of our country could also lead to so much inspiration and hope.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm glad you're doing this workshop, because I think the ideas are so relevant to today, and also the thing of going beyond just looking at one kind of news here and listening to the same people all the time. We really do have to open our minds to a higher way of thinking and finding ways that we can build bridges between the different aspects of our culture and bring out the best in each other rather than the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the goal, and part of the history we'll be looking at the classes. One is this one that connects to New Thought, to our own teaching, that goes back to Emerson and Thoreau and the social action aspect that they had. But I'm also, someone who really admires the African American story and African American spirituality, which is so embodied by King, which, like I said earlier, is kind of different than the more standard that we see today. And someone who I idealized so much, who was a big influence on Dr. King, was Howard Thurman. And Howard Thurman was the one that went to India and met Gandhi and learned from him. And Thurman tells a story of sitting down with an Indian man who really questioned him and said, "Here you are, you're from Africa, you're a part of the American country, but even as slaves, how could your people take on the religion of your masters?" And that kind of struck me when I read that, and I said, "Yeah, that's something else there."
Absolutely.
And Thurman kind of replied that us slaves, my people at the time, his grandmother had been a slave, so he communicated regularly with her. Is that they read the Bible, and I know you just finished teaching a class here on the Bible, and they didn't see what more of the traditionalists were seeing there about salvation and things like that. They saw the story of a Jewish people who were enslaved, and through things like the Psalms, which would eventually develop into gospel music and things there, they saw their own story in there, and so they identified with a different kind of Judaism, a different type of Christianity, and used that to inspire themselves and inspire the country, and of course kept elements of the traditional African religion and things like that. But it was an amazing thing to listen to how he explained to that gentleman from India how they had taken on that religion, but not to be oppressed by it, but to transform it. In an incredible way. And I think we find that in King's philosophy so much of taking a philosophy that some of us have experienced, have been used to oppress people, or used to stop moral progress, or used to try and say I'm right and you're wrong, and if you don't accord to what we're teaching, you're perhaps not following the right way. And I mean to be as respectful as possible when I say that. But King used it as, hey, this is a philosophy that can be for everybody. He even said, Gandhi was a Hindu, but he said that Gandhi was the greatest Christian he ever met, because he actually was practicing Jesus' teachings.
Yeah, and I love, King did a great story about traveling down that road where, the Good Samaritan story may have taken place, and going, down towards the Dead Sea and the dangers that were available on that road for people, and just talking about the courage that it would have taken for somebody to stop, and the courage that it takes for us to evolve our culture and for social justice to move forward. And I think that's part of his thing as a minister that I really loved about him. He was calling on people to a higher standard, and in really following that code of moral ethics that Jesus put out there, and to live that way, not to just think about it or talk about it, but to live that way. And I think that's why he's a gift to our teaching.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that we make a mistake in our teaching when we associate a little too much with those great folks who taught us, affirmative prayer and healthy mindedness and affirmations and manifestations and all that. All that's important, but there's also these important elements of our teaching about oneness and inclusivity and celebrating each other's differences that I think King is part of the lineage of, and have made a big difference in the world. I think Gandhi's a part of that as well, and sometimes we do things like celebrate the season for nonviolence, where those things come together. And the question becomes, as King put in one of his talks, where do we go from here? What's next? And a lot of that is about learning from folks like King, not just big speeches that they gave that are really important, but when you get into the sermons, really getting into an intelligent Christian-based philosophy that can be attractive to anybody, whether they're Christian or atheist or Hindu or Buddhist or New Age woo-woo hippie. It can apply to all of us.
Well, how does spirituality show up in our lives, and letting go of the idea that there's a separation about who we are on Sunday morning when we're all dressed up and going to church, and who we are on Monday when we're at our jobs. And I think that's the kind of spirituality and religion that King was talking about making it work in our lives and having this as a moral code that we live by all the time. And I think that's the gift that he's bringing forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to teaching the class, because we're going to be reading the sermons. We're going to be listening to the sermons. That's where you really get it, because you get the emphasis of the incredible way in which he preached, and you can actually hear the audience engaged. And we'll even be watching some of his sermons too. So it's kind of neat providing all those mediums. But if you're not taking the class, what I want you to know is you can YouTube some of these things. YouTube the Drum Major Instinct, which is one of the last sermons he ever gave, which to me is perhaps the greatest sermon ever given by anybody. Or there's something out there called the King Foundation. You can just look it up and read these sermons. And something that King did that I love, maybe you can speak to this being a minister as well, is he wouldn't just give a sermon one time. He liked to evolve it over time. One of his favorite sermons was called The Three Dimensions of a Complete Life. And I bet you throughout his whole ministerial career, it was a total different talk at the end, but he evolved it as he was evolving, as he saw the country evolving. He would just give these great talks with this great philosophy that could inspire us, not only in the time that he was in, but in our time today too.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, because that sermon lives in you, and every time you give it, it's different because you're comfortable where you're going. It gives you an opportunity to open up and let Spirit push you where you need to go that day. And I think when you listen to him, you can see that he's, Spirit's showing up.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate everyone for taking a listen. We're excited about not only celebrating King with the class, but including celebrating his ministry and so much that we do here, and all those great leaders who've not only committed to their spirituality, but making real and lasting change in their communities and in their countries.
It's all brand new, once again.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.